911 Golf 103, 132.405.
9132.405, Colleen 911 Golf, good Nacht.
Good afternoon.
Evelyn Forever, welcome home. Information Echo it is, descent flight over 100.
The 100 with Echo, everyone forever. Everything forever. Over and out. Have a better one.
She was born in Victorville, joined the Air Force in Colorado, and then came to Berlin. And there she became a true aviation legend. I once sat in a bar in Los Angeles, like on the other side of the world, and met an American Airlines pilot. He flies the 777, and I told him that I'm an air traffic controller in Berlin. And he goes, "Is there still this lady with a smoky voice?" And I told him, "Yeah, she is. That's Colleen." And the whole world knows her voice, Colleen Cookie Conrad. To start off, could you give us an ATC clearance?
Turn left heading 290, descend 3,000 feet, clear for the ILS 26 right. Call me established.
Awesome.
Oh God, I'd miss saying that. That was Tego, man.
Yeah, you're retired. How does it feel?
It feels good. As a matter of fact, yesterday somebody we both know asked me if I miss ATC. And I said, I haven't thought about it. Other than the other aviation podcast I did, I haven't thought about it once. And
Okay.
that feels good. It feels like it's just behind me. It was a cool ride, but now on to the next wave.
Awesome. I mean, it's not too long ago, right? A month ago, today you were still working, so.
Yeah, a month and 2 days ago, February 13th.
Yeah, awesome. So
Yeah.
I've seen, you've been on a couple of podcasts already. This is the first English one. For me, it's the first English one as well as a host. As you know, I just started with ATCpilot podcast a couple of weeks ago and did this test round with Harold, another colleague of us. And yeah, let's give this a try. I'm really excited. And you are actually the reason I started podcasting, because I thought when you retire, you are that aviation legend. Everyone knows your voice. I just want to keep all those little stories you told me within the last couple of years when we were working together. So
buy my book. I'm writing a book. So when that comes out, oh yeah.
Awesome.
That's
you could probably write like 10 books.
That's what my friends tell me. But right now I just want to concentrate on finishing the one I started like 20 years ago.
Okay. Wow.
So it's funny to go back and read things I wrote 20 years ago, and then with who I am today, to try to place it where I want to put it. So right now I'm doing a lot of revision because I don't know, the 35-year-old Colleen had some strange ideas about stuff.
Okay.
We all evolve.
but there won't be aviation related only, I guess. There will be like a book out of your life, or?
Yeah, out of my life. Right now I'm trying to think about putting it in 5 different little small books that you could read individually, because each one on its own is worthy of a book.
Okay.
So I think from the band 3, 4, and 5, there'll be ATC in it. But from band or volume 1 and volume 2, that's just everything that came before my 18th birthday.
Okay. Yeah, talking about your life, let's start right away. I just said you were born in Victorville, California, Southern California Logistics Airport. I've been there a couple of times. It's an airplane scrapyard today. It was a US Air Force base back then. So your dad, he was in the Air Force, right?
Yeah, my dad was in the Air Force, and I think he was in logistics actually when we were there. So I was just born there. I think we moved when I was about 6 months old. Then we moved to Tallahassee, Florida. And that was another Eglin Air Force Base, which I also think doesn't exist anymore in Florida. If you looked it up, I think it's probably a civil airport now. All of this stuff from the 60s is gone. That feels weird too.
Yeah, Cold War's over, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And then how did you get to ATC?
So when I was in I have 9 brothers and sisters.
Oh, wow.
And I'm number 4, and to study in America is quite expensive. So I just went to an Air Force recruiter and took the Eignungsprüfung, or the eligibility test.
Mhm.
And they said I would be, Eignungsprüfung in English would be, let's go with eligibility. So
Yeah.
that I would be, or jobs that would be suitable for me were two. One was air traffic control and one was a security policeman, which is like a detective. And I was like, I don't really like guns. Don't ask me why I wanted to join the military if I don't like guns, but I was like, ooh, you definitely have to hold a gun for that one. So I was like, screw it. And I didn't cuss there. You notice I toned it down with the language. So
That's okay.
and,
We'll beat that.
okay. I'm gonna try to make sure this isn't so many beeps here today. Yeah, and then I just took the ATC. And what you do in the Air Force is you can say, okay, they'll say that you're suited to this job. If you actually get to do it is based on how you do in the school. So I went to the basic training in San Antonio, Texas. It's 8 weeks of, learning how to wear the uniform, learning all the regulations, learning how to be a soldier, learning how to run, learning how to drink water, because it was always really hot there. So you were forced to drink two glasses of water at every meal. And that was actually my job at every meal, was to make sure that everyone put 2 full glasses of water on their tray and they had to drink it. And if I liked somebody, I would let them only put like a half a glass of water. Because then once you drink the 2 glasses of water, you could go get soda or a glass of milk. And I'm like, I knew some people needed their milk every day, and I'd be like, all right, you're cool. And if I thought you were a jerk, I'd be like, nah, fill that puppy up. But okay, that was just like fun, frustrated fun. Yeah, so after that, I went to Biloxi, Mississippi. And in the middle of that Ausbildung, there was Hurricane Elena. So Biloxi, Mississippi is where all U.S. Air Force members get their basic training. And in the middle of my training, Hurricane Elena came and they brought us all into this place called Cody Hall. It's like it looks like a giant basketball stadium. And that's where they had the tower simulator. We had a small radar simulator. It wasn't like connected positions. And it was a little bit better than analog. It still showed the mode 3, which civilians use, the mode 2, which military planes use. There wasn't labels on the aircraft. So you would have your flight base strip in front of you, and you would have to remember which call sign belonged to which transponder code. Like in your own head, you would have to be like, okay, 5053 belongs to the SAC, or not SAC, Special Air Mission 27 Charlie. And you would have to try to make this like Eselsbrücke with every target you had. So you can understand back then, capacity wasn't like it is today.
Yeah, and it didn't have the altitude and airspeed and everything on either, right? It was just a dot and you had to remember everything else.
No, that would be analog. We had analog with transponder data.
Okay, so you could read out the altitude with that thing or whatever. Okay, I see.
Right. So we had the altitude readout and the mode. So we had mode Charlie, mode 2. The military targets all showed mode 2. So that was helpful to make me remember which were my military targets, and then the mode 3 for the civilian. And once we got to Berlin, we had a little bit more. We had the 3D antenna. Everyone knows that big golf ball at Tempelhof. And that allowed us to read measured heights, which is something I guess the military uses. They also have like crazy ranges on their, radar defense radar and stuff like that. I think anyone that studied this, Malaysian Airlines missing airplane, I think most people learned a little bit about the capabilities of military radar. I don't know. Did you go into that at all?
I've actually listened to a podcast yesterday with a guy from Flight Radar 24. And he said that when reading the report of the Malaysian aircraft being missing, And it stated that it was missing from the radar scope already, but it was still on flight radar 24. That's what a controller said on the phone when another controller asked, hey, where's that flight? It was like, well, I lost him on radar, but he's still on flight radar 24, which was pretty funny, I guess. But
Oh, wow.
probably not for too long either. So, yeah.
But I would think they also have to have like a time lapse thing. I don't think they show actual, I think they're not allowed to show actual radar positions. I think there's maybe a 30-second delay. I don't know if he mentioned that.
Possible, yeah. I don't know about that.
Because even when the DFS put Stanley online, I don't know if you remember Stanley, they also, I think they had, if it wasn't maybe even a 90-second delay so that nobody on the ground would know the actual position of an aircraft. I could be
but
wrong.
I think flight radar 24 is pretty accurate. I mean, when I'm at airport plane spotting and everything, you could always just look like 10 miles out, there's a light on final, and then you watch, oh, that's the 747 I want to take a photo of. So it's pretty accurate.
Yeah,
it's
maybe.
Awesome.
Okay, maybe they don't have to do that time delay thing anymore. So that was Biloxi, the radar, Elena. So I don't know, we spent like a few weeks doing cleanup. We spent at least a week in this Cody Hall. So it was like me and maybe 250 young female soldiers where we just slept on the floor and we used our helmet. They would pour water in our helmet, and that's how we could take a bath every day.
Okay.
And so that was pretty cool. At any rate, it's at the beginning of tech school. Okay, your first week of tech school, you have to take the FAA test. So this, if you can get your FAA certificate, maybe it's the first 2 weeks. It's all the basics of air traffic control. Basics about equipment, basics about radar, basics about meteorology, basics about nav aids, basics about airspace structure. There's all these different sections. And then after the end of 2 weeks, you take this test. If you get your FAA certificate, then you can go on and finish your basic training as an air traffic controller for the Air Force. And the first couple of days, I had zero idea about what we were doing there. And I thought I better sit in the front row so I can listen good and ask questions. And I think the instructor was probably talking about nav aids or something and saying, you know, or I know he was talking about a compass. And I was like, I was not a Girl Scout. I don't remember. So he was talking about north and south and east and west. And I felt like I was totally unprepared for the world, because the idea that 360 was north everywhere was like mind-blowing for me. So, and I couldn't contain myself. I sat in the front seat of the class and I was like, so let me get this straight. 090 is always this direction. And yeah, and okay, and well, this is so weird. So north, south, and all of these little numbers are directions. And everyone in the class was like, you know, oh my God, and rolling their eyes. Come on, let's move on to the next subject. But that went on for like the whole 2 weeks, no matter what they were talking about. And the vectoring really blew my mind, because I was like, okay, the airplane is here and wants to go there. And then I have to put like a compass around him. And then I send him to the place that's the number on the compass that takes him. I was like, this is like math, man. This is blowing my mind. And,
you were only struggling with the headings in training, right? I mean, in theory, you told me once you always had the 100% mark.
Oh, well, no, this was my very first 2 weeks of air traffic control school.
Oh, okay.
This was like, I had zero idea before this. So in these first 2 weeks where they were teaching you everything, I was like, I had no idea before. You know, I had no interest in aviation other than my dad was in the Air Force. So I would always look up in the skies and see airplanes, which I thought was cool. I know I visited a tower on Okinawa. And when we lived on Okinawa, I remember seeing the SR-71. I mean, that was always impressive, but I never felt a relationship to flight other than the fact that I was an Air Force kid. So I was like, okay, because I was born on an Air Force base, I automatically have my wings. To me, And that's all that I needed to know about airplanes. They have wings and they have seats. That's cool. And yeah, so at the end of the 2 weeks, we all had to take our test. And the teacher was saying, somebody got 100%. And a couple of people are going to have to look for a new job. And she was like, I'll start at the bottom, except for the people that are going to have to look for a new job or something like that. And then she was like, airman, blah, 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 70%, you passed. Airman, blah, 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 airman, blah, blah, blah. And there was only like 5 of us left in the class, and she still hadn't said my name. And I was like, I felt like my butt fell through the chair and hit the ground. And I was like, God, I'm gonna have to become a security policeman or something like that. And then she went on. And then she said, okay, and 100%. And she put it in front of me. And I thought, I guess I'll turn around. So I was just like,
That was another beep.
exactly. I said,
Okay.
no, and I was like, I was happy, and everyone was like, whoa, we're happy for you, but we can't believe it. This is impossible. And I was like, yeah, man. I have to say, I super applied myself. I was in the books all the time, because I was like, I'm gonna have to try 10 times harder than everybody else, because they all brought something with them to the table, and I was starting from zero. Yeah, so then my last day of school, I also got, maybe not the last week, I got my orders to Berlin. And I was happy about that. I was like,
Yeah,
dude, go to Europe.
I was gonna say, you had this kind of wish list, and you were
Exactly.
like, I want to go as far from the US as I can, right?
Exactly. I think if I think back, I know for sure Hawaii was on the wish list. I think I also put Italy, Aviano, and the Azores, and Japan.
Okay.
So, and Berlin. And I'm guessing Berlin was like number 5 on the list. It wasn't the top of my list. I'm pretty sure Hawaii was the top of the list, because why not? You know, if you get a chance to go to Hawaii, take it.
Yeah.
And so I was happy. I got my orders. Orders are like a big 300 page. It's all the same piece of paper, but 300 copies of it, because you everywhere you go, you have to give somebody 5 copies here or 3 copies there. So I took my big stack of papers, and I went home for 2 weeks vacation. And like immediately when I got home, I wanted to walk onto an Air Force base with my ID card in civilian clothes. I was like, man, I've been wearing this uniform for like the last 5 months. I want to go on base with my ID card and show it to people. So I just thought, I'll take my luggage and then get my ticket, because I really wanted to get my ticket. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get my ticket. So I went to the Air Force Base, to the travel center, and I handed the guy my orders, thinking this was going to be a quick and easy, dirty thing, and I'd be out of there, you know, go to McDonald's or the Burger King on base and get a milkshake and just enjoy the day. And he'd stopped, and he was like, oh, 1 second, clickety, 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 click, clickety, 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 click. And then he pulls something out, and I could see canceled on a big red stamp on the paper. And I thought, so my little heart's beating. And then he's like, clickety, 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 click, this teletype machine. This other big, you know, they had those papers that had the holes on the side. So like a Conrad. So this whole thing comes out, and I could see from where I was standing, I was like, Vance Air Force Base. I wasn't sure if that meant that's where I was going to have to go, but I thought, I'm not giving this guy my luggage. I was like, dude, I forgot something in the car. And I thought, this is not what I wanted. I didn't want to go 100 miles north of Colorado Springs. So I got in the car, and I thought, Air Force, the U.S. Air Force Academy is just up the street. I drove there, go in. And I don't even know why this idea came to me. And I don't know why I even thought it was appropriate that the Air Force would deal with this. But I thought, you know, why not? And I went to the U.S. Air Force Academy, and the guy told me, you're in the wrong place. And I was like, oh, come on, man. I was in the neighborhood. Then I got to drive all the way back to Widefield and blah, blah. And he was like, okay, I'll make an exception. When do you want to go? And I was like, ASAP. I would like to go to my place of duty as soon as possible. And he was like, yeah, well, you still got some vacation. And I was like, doesn't matter. I'll take it some other time. Let's get this thing started. And I think he made it for 2 or 3 days later. I can't remember. All I know is I gave him my bag. He printed out my ticket, you know, it's Pan Am. And I was like, I'm going to New York. I'm going to, oh my God, I'm going to New York. I'm going to Berlin. Oh my God. So I was all excited, drove home. And my dad was sitting in his, you know, lazy boy chair. And I was like, Dad, my country needs me. I've got to leave day after tomorrow. And he was in the Air Force himself. So he was like, I think he said something like, that's a load of malarkey or something like that. And I was like, no, I got my ticket, man. I got to go early. Country needs me. So, which was Conrad.
Do you remember your flights to Berlin and to New York? What airplanes did you fly on?
I think New York. I don't remember what I took from Colorado Springs to New York, but I know I took a TriStar. I took a Pan Am L1011. I think that's nice, the TriStar, right? Right.
Yeah, it is.
L1011 to Hamburg, and then we got in a 727 from Hamburg to Berlin. And I know that call sign, it was Clipper 606, because even when I eventually later worked the corridors, like in the morning, Clipper 600 would come in from Hamburg. Later in the afternoon, Clipper 602, 604, 606, 608. Mm-hmm. So those call signs belong to the Hamburg Strecke for Berlin. But anytime I talked to Clipper 606 afterwards, I always felt like I have to make it number one, you know, that's like my plane. Yeah. So that always felt good.
And then there's a special story of you being on board that airplane, right? When you came to Berlin the first day, nobody was expecting you. So what did you do?
Yeah, so I got on the flight, and then once I got off in Hamburg, I was confused in Hamburg. I thought I had landed in Berlin, and the guy was like, no, the flight's going further. And I was like, oh, how do you find that stuff out? You know, I evidently hadn't looked at my ticket and didn't realize there was like a stop. So I was like, this sucks. Why don't people tell me anything? And yeah, in Hamburg, they gave me like a coupon or something for food, the US Air Force, not like a coupon, like a good shine or something. So I know I went into the cafeteria there. This has nothing to do with ATC. And I got a hamburger because I thought that was it. It made me chuckle to get a hamburger in Hamburg, which I thought was hilarious. So I'm in my uniform and I have my hamburger and I get in the airplane. And in the airplane, it dawned on me that I had canceled orders so that nobody where I was going was going to know I was on my way. And I had $5 in my pocket. I mean, at US military bases, there's US military banks. It's called the Savings and Credit Union, SCU. So I knew with my ID card, I could always go to the credit union and get cash. We didn't have Geldautomaten back then. Believe it or not, those did not exist back then. And I was like, whatever, as soon as I get to the base, I can, go to the bank and take money out. But why I thought it was okay to travel over the Atlantic with $5 in my pocket, today, there's no way that would happen. But I did. So it dawned on me that nobody was expecting me. And I asked the stewardess if she could bring me to the cockpit, that I needed to talk to my people. And I'm pretty sure that's what I said. And then she was like, 1 second. And being in uniform, I mean, this was before 9/11, whatever. I mean, an Air Force member in the city of Berlin wants to go into the cockpit. It's like, yeah, okay, we can do this. And she let me go into the cockpit. And then this gray-haired man, he's probably my age. He was probably like my age now. But when you're 19 years old, it's like, and he turned around and he was like, so what do we have here? Or something like that. And then I said, I'm Cookie Conrad from Colorado, and I need to talk to my people. And he was like, who exactly are your people? And I was like, I'm an air traffic controller. And he was like, oh, really? For which airport? And I had I was like, what the hell is he talking about here? What is he talking about? And he was like, well, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say you were for Tempelhof. And yeah, so, which also confused me, but I think I had remembered seeing something that said TCA, Tempelhof Central Airport, somewhere on my orders. So I was like, that could be. Not like I had reviewed or looked at or read my orders at all. For me, it was just this big stack of papers. And I was like, it says my name on it, says Berlin. I'll just take this with me everywhere I go. No need to read the fine print. But
and then you were
yeah,
flying
so
to
then
Tegel, right? So you kind of,
exactly.
and you didn't know that there were 3 airports actually in Berlin back then, or actually 4. So
Right, I had no idea.
So then
I also didn't know that Berlin was in the middle of Eastern Germany.
Mhm.
In my mind, I thought this is weird, that Berlin had a wall around it on the West German side, and that the East German part of, or East Berlin part of East Berlin was on the East German side with a wall around it. And I was like, why? If it's in the West and it has a wall around it, whatever. I was like, politicians do funny things, but I had no idea that I was flying. So I must have been really poorly educated, is all I can say right here. All I know is that I had no idea I was flying to the middle of East Germany. I think at some point in time, somebody cleared that up for me. And there I was also dumbfounded. I was like, what? I'm surrounded by communists. So, yeah. So then Don talked to the controllers and was like, Berlin, Clipper 606. And they were like, Clipper 606, go ahead. And he's like, this is Clipper 606. And I got a girl here, uniform, Cookie from Colorado. She says she's one of yours. Then there was like silence. And then he gave me a headset and he said, okay, you can talk now. And then I was like, test, 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 over, test. Berlin, this is Cookie Conrad from Colorado. More silence. And then I thought, oh, and then Don got back on the radio and explained to them that I needed a ride if someone can come get me. There was another big long silence. And then eventually somebody said, okay, we're going to send a couple of people there to go get her. And they told me to wait at the meeting point. So when
because
I got
you landed in Tegel and you had to go to Tempelhof.
Exactly. And 2 young airmen, 2 controllers, showed up in a baby blue Volkswagen Bug. And I thought that was the coolest thing. I was like, I'm driving in a German car. And they put me in my big bag in the back of their Volkswagen Bug. And they drove me to the base. And then some young girl that's also a controller was like, well, nobody knows she's here. She doesn't have a room. I'll let her sleep in my room. And I was like, that's cool with me. So she took me to her room. And then whenever I woke up, the young controllers, all in their 20s, were like, let's show her the town. So they took me out like every day to the Kudam, Joe's on Kudam. They were like, you need to eat a donut today. You need to eat your first currywurst. You need to drink Berliner Weiss mit Schuss. You need to, every day they were giving me all these new experiences. And I was loving it. I was not questioning it because I thought my days are numbered. I'm going to be out of here in no time. And at some point in time, the girl's name is Rhonda. Rhonda had to go back to work and she took me with her. And then I just hung out in the radar room. Like if her shift was from 6 to 2, I would stay there till 10 o'clock at night. I wanted to meet everybody in the facility and ask questions. And I just sat in the control room probably for a little over a week, from 6 in the morning till 10, 11 o'clock at night. I'd sit there with the night shift. I'd go outside and stare at the airplanes on the, gee whiz, on the apron from the balcony. And I got to know everybody and I did things for them. I would go pick up their food. I'd polish their shoes. I would go pick up their dry cleaning. I'd go to the post office for them. Anything anybody needed done, I was doing. And I wasn't doing it to be a butt kisser. I was just trying to keep busy. I was like, what can I do? Nobody offered me any like ATC related training. So then the chief controller had heard there was this young girl in the facility, and he kind of recalled seeing my name at some point in time on their inbound board. You know, you have a board of the status of your employees, and it says if you're getting inbound employees and who's outbound, who's leaving at what time, and then you have to figure out, you know, how you move your Dean's plan planning. And so he had kind of recalled seeing that name there, but he also knew it had been canceled for a good reason, because you never had inexperienced controllers in Berlin because it was too politically sensitive. So it was never meant that fresh controllers from the academy would go to a politically sensitive airspace like Berlin. So there was no trainings program for me. But at any rate, I walked into his office, and he was a graduate of the US Air Force Academy, and so was his wife. So from Colorado, or they knew Colorado Springs. So I knew that as I went in there, and I was like, "Sir, Airman Conrad reports as ordered." And he was like, "At ease, Airman." I'm like, you know, like, I'm gonna be like a good soldier here. And he was grinning because it was like too much. You know, nobody walks into a chief controller's office and goes, "Sir."
Yeah.
But I was like, I'm gonna show him I'm a good soldier. And he was like, "Everyone here seems to like you, but you don't belong to us. I'm gonna have to figure out what to do with you because we can't keep you." And I was like, "Man, I really like it here, and I'd really like to stay here." And he made some phone calls. He called like the Air Force headquarters, and they informed him that Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma was missing me, but not so bad. They were like, "Well, we could actually do without her," because the Air Force was like, "Man, now we got to organize her a flight and see if there's probably disciplinary action." And the chief controller was like, "Well, we're okay with her. We just need to see if we can get a trainings program for her." So that was a big question. And then they sent me to the training office. This guy named Cooch, and he was like, "Yeah, I'll see what I can do. I'll throw something together." And I was like, "Cool." So yeah, he started my training, and then it probably took over a month to get the final approval from the Air Force for me to stay there. And also the final approval to have inexperienced controller, one that might not be politically correct on the radio. We don't want that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
To stay in Berlin. And yeah, the rest is history.
And
So,
then the airspace you started working in was super different from what you knew, right? Because there were corridors through this Eastern German airspace. So how was that
right.
like?
Okay, once they explained to me that these corridors, they're 20 nautical miles wide. There was an inbound route and an outbound route in each corridor. And I think each of the routes were 2.5 miles from the corridor boundary. So we always, if you stayed on the radial, you would always be the minimum separation from the lateral limits of the corridor. And in each corridor, the routings went into like a V shape to a fix. So they weren't parallel the whole time. It was like a departure route would go to this one fix, and then it would split off. So there you would always have to have your vertical separation until they got to a point on the corridor where you could discontinue vertical, then they would fly past each other. That's important because back then we often had radar outages, and you needed to control the aircraft non-radar. So they would have to report leaving this fix or approaching this other fix so that you knew you had enough lateral separation to discontinue vertical.
Mm-hmm.
So that was super important back then. And yeah, all of the corridors 20 nautical miles wide. The control zone in Berlin was from the center of the control zone was the position of the Berlin Air Safety Center. And that was the since the airspace over Berlin was controlled by the Allies and the corridors, the Allies in this instance are the Russians, the British, the French, and the Americans. So the corridors and everything that went on in the corridors and in the control zone around Berlin had to be done with approval from all 4 allies, which included the Russians. The Russians also owned all of the airspace over East Germany. So they had a say in what happened in the corridors because they allowed us to have the corridors over their airspace, and they had a say should an aircraft leave the corridors. So the Berlin Air Safety Center, it's on Hauptstraße in Berlin in Schöneberg. Have you ever been there?
No.
So, okay. Hauptstraße. Well, if you ever go to Schöneberg, look for Hauptstraße, and then there's a big ehemalige Gerichtsgebäude, and it was pretty empty. There, like we would have parties there in the summer, and you would go in, and there would be one room with this huge long table. And I think each week a different allied power had like the biggest say, or was like the like Speaker of the House or something like that. And at the head of the table would be whoever that ally was for the week. That would be the Americans maybe this week. And then on the side of the table would be a French officer, a British officer, and the Russians always had a translator. There were always 2 Russians in that room. They were never alone. There was always the Russian officer and his translator. And we had a flight plan processing system at Tempelhof called FLIPCO. I think it stood for Flight Information Processing and Coordination. It was a system that only worked within Berlin, and then to Langen radar at Mansbach, which was the end of the southern corridor. I guess it's like Mansbach, Fulda, wherever the East German boundary was down there. And in Mansbach, which is on the West German side, we had an antenna, because the southern corridor to Berlin was so long that we needed to have another radar antenna to do the full coverage. So we would send our radar maintenance guys for, I think they would go 1 week at a time, or maybe even 10 days, and they would sleep in a hotel, and they would do the maintenance for the southern corridor radar unit. So like whenever those guys would come back, I would see him like in the club, and I'd be like, yo, how was Mansbach? And, you know, so we all knew each other. We knew all of our radar maintenance guys, like the guys that did our approach radar. That was the ANP-12, also an antenna on the top of Tempelhof. And then we had these ANPFS. Those were the PAR radars, antennas. So totally different stuff. But we knew all the guys that worked on the stuff. We knew the guys that fixed our radios. It was probably now like the relationship with the technikers, you know, you chit chat with them. And what was I going to say? Those are all the corridors, the Berlin Air Safety Center.
That air safety center that was involved whenever aircraft had to leave the corridor, right? I mean, when you have thunderstorms and everything, then pilots are not able to stick on their route and they have to deviate to the left or right. So what happened when they had to leave the corridor and entered Russian airspace?
So the safety center was involved with everything. Like I said, we had this FLIPCO. So I would get a phone call from, say, Bremen Radar, and they would give me a Bruckendorf estimate. The flight had to enter the corridor within a 3-minute window. Like if I said 1917, the plane was going to enter the corridor. The pilot could enter as early as 1914 and a couple of seconds, and no later than 1919 and 59 seconds. So for the Bremen controllers, I never really talked to them about this. They would normally do the frequency change when they were assured that the plane wouldn't have to do a 360 because it couldn't comply with the ±3 minute thing. So normally they would only do a frequency change to Berlin radar when they knew we weren't going to have to spin a plane. If they did send the plane to us and a speed control wouldn't be enough, to assure the pilot entered within this window of time, yeah, we would have to turn it out. And then I would have to call the air safety center and say, he couldn't make the time, so I need to give a new estimate. Then I would give a new estimate, and then the Russians would give us a new approval. You weren't also supposed to do like, you were supposed to enter the corridors on a straight flight path. You had to enter over Bruckendorf or over Heiligen or over Mansbach. You couldn't do this fishtail stuff to gain some time or whatever. So that was always like, it would take a lot of your capacity just to stare at a plane and be like, oh, is he gonna make it? Because to know, you have to turn them around, and there could be one. So there would be a lot of coordination involved with Bremen radar or Frankfurt to say, I got to spin him. You're going to have to climb that other guy or descend that other guy or turn the other guy out. And then we would have to make 2 whole new estimates with the Russians. And you asked what would happen if they left the corridors. If a plane left the lateral limits of the corridors, they weren't supposed to leave the vertical limits because that was more dangerous. The first option was always to try to laterally go around clouds or something. The pilot always had to do a pan, 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 pan. Pan, 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 pan. Do his pan, pan, pan thing, which happened quite often back then. I was really used to hearing pan, 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 pan. It was something that we heard all the time back then. Even Mayday we heard quite often, because different pilots would say different things. Sometimes they would say Mayday, and I'd be like, oh, okay, what's this emergency? And then he'd say, well, we're going to leave the corridor. And I'd be like, okay. And I would inform the safety center that I had an aircraft that was leaving the lateral limits. And then they would stamp his flight plan with this sentence that we also had to read to the pilot. And it said, safety of flight cannot be guaranteed. This flight can be fired upon without warning. That was stamped on the flight plan.
Okay.
So the first time that happened, I thought, they're not messing around, but nothing ever really happened. So I never felt, I think the first few times this seemed like a serious sentence to say to a pilot, and they all seemed pretty cool with it. I know the first couple, I was like, what? I got to tell this guy this? Because you have to inform the pilot. You know, you're leaving the lateral limits of the Berlin corridor. Safety of flight cannot be guaranteed. And that would be to motivate them to get their butts back into the corridor. But we never really got approval to exit the corridors. The Russians would just say they're informed. They're informed. One of our flights has left the lateral limits.
So did you ever see that they've been intercepted by like Russian combat aircraft or so?
Yeah, I had pilots that would say they saw aircraft. I would see primary targets moving really fast. So I would say the Russian aircraft almost never, ever had a transponder on. The whole time I was in Berlin. The only Soviet aircraft I saw with transponder would be like the Aeroflot going into Schönefeld or the Lot. But all over the place, we always saw tons of targets going below. And since we didn't have altitude readout, I mean, okay, we had the 3D radar, we had the FPS 117, the golf ball, so we could read out measured heights, but they're not reliable. But I would see,
and that was pretty limited in range, right? The 3D radar.
I think the FPS 117 went all the way to almost to Heiligen. I think the FPS 117 had actually much further capabilities because it was used to look at Russian strategic flight maneuvers way past.
Yeah.
So the air traffic controllers never used them to their full capacity. I think their full capacity was for the guys behind that other door.
Okay.
This sounds like conspiracy theory stuff, but it's no, but it's true.
Talking about Bartek means Berlin Air Road
Traffic Control Center.
Traffic Control Center, right?
Yeah.
So you were working there as a military controller. When did the civil controllers join you, the BARTEC?
So, okay, during the time, okay, the 1946 agreement designed the corridors. I think I brought this up before. And back then, planes couldn't really fly above 10,000 feet. So they agreed that the top of the corridor would be only 10,000 feet. They didn't imagine in 1946 we would need much more than that. And they also decided back then that only Allied controllers would control the flights to and from Berlin. We did have civilian controllers in the towers. I think they made that exception in the 1970s because the French couldn't always man Tegel Tower with enough people or something like that. So in the 70s, they started to allow West German controllers to work the airspace over Berlin. And Berlin also had another special facility that didn't exist anywhere in the world. It was called the Berlin Mission. And it was a person that was picked by the United States president. It was a presidential appointee. It was like a miniature FAA, but only for the airspace over Berlin. So the Berlin Mission had other duties also, but they had one person that was responsible for aviation related matters. And he was also responsible for licensing and changes to the 1946 agreement. And my Air Force squadron at Tempelhof was called the 1946 Communication Squadron. So it ties in nicely to how the name of the document that created the corridors. And so the Berlin Air Mission gave these West Germans permission to control in the towers. So that wasn't necessarily in the airspace to and from Berlin over East Germany, because they specifically didn't want West Germans controlling the flights over East Germany.
So that happened only after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Right.
The civilian
After the
controllers
fall
joined.
Right. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, pretty quickly, the BFS, the Bundesanstalt für Flugsicherung, came to evaluate the situation, and they were invited by this new political entity called the 4+2 group. And that was the 4 allies with the 2 Germanys on the table. Because this was before unification. This was already, I think the BFS came already in the spring of 1990. It became clear that there was going to have to be some kind of restructuring, that the West Germans would be involved in the East German airspace. And the 4 allies sat down to talk to the 2 Germanys on how this would look and what would have to be the steps to take for the allies to evacuate the East German airspace and for the East and West Germans to find a way to control it independently from Allied forces. And like I said, that already started in early 1990. And I would say in the summer of 1990, we got like, I think 8 or 10 West German supervisors were sent to Berlin to get licenses so that they could understand what our technical shortcomings were, our telephone systems. They needed to learn what our navigation aids were. They needed to get a Überblick of what was there and what would be needed to develop it to connect with the West German or even Western European networks, because eventually we would have to take up all of the airspace around East Germany. So these Wachleiters came, they got their licenses. They weren't Wachleiters in the BARTAC. They had a mission. Their mission was to somehow design a way to step by step, slowly, incrementally get the 2 German airspaces into one homogeneous, functioning body of airspace.
And then you were actually involved in creating that new Berlin airspace, right? The airspace structure.
Right. Well, first came this 4+2 talks, and I usually sat with the Air Force on their side of the table, across the table from the Germans. And normally I would be the person that would explain like details about stuff in the control room, or specifically how we work, because these were mostly military men on our side of the table. It was all colonels and majors, and the people that were responsible for the radar and the radar capabilities. The Russians would be there to represent the East German airspace and let us know. They always had to be careful what they told us about their radar capabilities, but we needed to know what kind of facilities they had in order to design airspace over East Germany, and to be able to see what we would need to be sighted, because back then, or anytime, a navigational aid has to be put on a site that makes sense, especially if you're especially with radio signals and stuff like that. Radios, with the cosine, you have to make sure you don't have stuff like broken, big mountains and stuff. So it's not easy to cite navigational aids or cite radio facilities back then, before it was digitalized. Back then, before this was all stuff that had to be done from the surface of the earth back then. I think we were getting in the direction of, like, even our telecommunications, we were moving to the next generation. I think that's what the West Germans told us too back then, that they would envision that we could have all of our types of coordination and stuff done digitally through what do you call those? Glasfaser.
Yeah.
Glasfaser cable. That didn't exist back then, believe it or not.
Okay.
Not with the type of bandwidth now. So I remember the West Germans talking about this, and that we could handle big volumes of data and stuff with this, and that they were working with telecom. There was people from the Post and telecom also at these discussions to tell us what would be the capabilities, the technical capabilities to create this new airspace thing. So I always sat there like, whoa, really? Because I always thought I was privy to special information that I had no business knowing, but I was like, okay. And they would ask me basic questions, maybe about something air traffic controlling, and I would be like, oh, I'm an expert here. And it would be something that anybody could know, I thought. But that felt nice. And because of that, I mean, in 1992, I could have left the US Air Force in 1993, because then my contract would have been up. And I asked the Air Force if I could leave early to stay with the Germans, because back then I was married to a West German, and he kind of wanted to stay. He was like, before he had wanted to go someplace else and see things in the world. But I think after the fall of the wall, and that the two Germanys were coming together, he thought, I would like to see this. I don't really want to leave in the middle of this. And I was like, okay, I will leave the Air Force early. And the BFS was actively recruiting amongst the military controllers for whoever was going to get out. And they offered me a job. So, and for the US Air Force, I was the Trainingsleiter. Believe it or not, I was actually in the training up time. Mostly, my biggest responsibility was like the Flipco, the task. You can ask all of the East Germans. Whenever they first came to Tempelhof, like, they got all their equipment briefings from me. So that was like my area of expertise. And
a couple of years later, you left the DFS, right? And then you went back to the US.
Oh yeah, but that comes like much later. This comes like 8 years later. So okay. I left in 92. I left the Air Force, and then I finally signed all my papers at like noon, and I had a 3 o'clock shift as a DFS or a BFS employee. Or no, actually I was employed by the Luftfahrtbundesamt, because I couldn't work for the BFS because the BFS was for Beamte. So
and that was only for Germans.
Right. So I had a contract with Luftfahrtbundesamt as a Angestellte and ich durfte die Tätigkeit Fluglotsen ausüben. I think something like that is in my contract.
Okay, yeah.
So because it was a hoheitliche Aufgabe and normally only Beamte could do that.
Yeah.
So I got this exception in the contract and I finally got out of the Air Force like at 12:30, signed all my papers. I was a free citizen, a civilian. And at 3 o'clock, I had to be back in the center for my first shift as a civilian. That's weird, to tell you the truth. That was weird because it was like, I left, I went back. I think I brought clothes that day because I knew I was cutting it tight. And then I put on my civilian clothes and I walked into the center and I thought, man, the last 7 years, I've been walking in here with a uniform on every day and this is just weird. And in that moment, I realized that my buddies in their Air Force uniforms were no longer still my colleagues, still my buddies, but that all of a sudden I was working with these East and West Germans, which was strange. It felt almost like, ooh, I left the team, but I still joined another team. But I just know it was a strange feeling that day. But I thought, man, I'm doing the exact same job. There's no difference. I just get to wear cool clothes. Yeah.
And so how come you decided in I think it was 2000 to leave Germany?
Oh, because I was going to get married. So I moved to New Jersey to get married. And after about a month of being in New Jersey, so I put my Kündigung in. I left in, I think I left in it was June of 2000, right? So it was like after the Wende, or the 2K thing. So in June of 2000, I flew to New Jersey to get married. And after about a month, I decided, oh, I think I made the wrong decision. And after 2 months, I was absolutely sure I made the wrong decision. And then I called the supervisor in Berlin and I said, I think I made a wrong decision. Is there any way we can turn this around? And he was like, sure. And I was like, really? And then I asked how long I was like, well, how long can I stay here before I have to come back? Or when do you need me? And he was cool about that too. He was like, well, you can stay away for 6 months because of your Aufenthaltsgenehmigung. And so I was gone like 5 months, 3 weeks and 6 days. I came back on the...
How did you realize that it was the wrong decision? Was it because you felt more like a German than you did as an American, and you felt like America was not your country anymore?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, the whole time before 2000, I would always talk about how great America was and how much I missed it. And I was always comparing everything in Germany to what I remembered from the US. And when I went back to the US, it was, or as a more adult person, I looked at things a lot differently. And I thought, this is not... And just basic conversations with people would turn really strange quickly. And I thought, wow, I can't live and be the person that I want to be here. There were weird social constraints and people's political mentality and lots of things. And I thought I was more German than I had realized.
Yeah, and that sounds pretty similar to what happened 6 years later in 2006, when you left Berlin and the whole radar facility was closed and moved to Bremen. Then, like on the first days you arrived in Bremen, you were probably like, oh my God, I was living in Berlin. That's such a great city. There's so much going on. And now I'm in that small northern Germany city. There's not much going on. People are a lot different. But you told me that later you realized that, well, it's not too bad here, right?
I mean, in 2000, when I made the decision to go back, I made, pros and cons of going back to Berlin. And on the part, maybe in the middle, I had a spoiler that said reality. I was like, I have to, if I go back to Berlin, I have to know, I know part of going back is going to be this move to Bremen is in my future.
Oh, so you already knew
So-
in 2000 that that would
I think
come.
I think in 1999 is when they told us.
Okay.
There was like a Wirtschafts firm or Wirtschaftsprüfer firm that did a big Gutachten and decided what would make the most economic sense. And they compared the different places and which would make the most economic sense for the DFS to combine facilities. And they chose Bremen for some reason. And I had visited Bremen also in, I probably came here in like 2001. I think the first year after I came back from the US, I was like, I need to go take a visit to what's going to be my future home. Because I knew that was down the road eventually. And I drove through here, and I live on Kurfürstenallee, and there's a Blitzer. And I was kind of like, chugga, driving down the street, not paying attention to what the speed limit was. And that Blitzer is right in front of the apartment that I've lived in the last 14 years. But on that fatal day, I had to give up my license for 6 months after that because I think it was a 50 zone and I was going, I don't know, 75 or something. Because I was just cruising. I was like, I'm going to check out my new city. So I thought, that's a rude welcoming.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. But no, I when I made the decision to come back, I knew that was in my future. And when I drove here also in 2006, I was thinking in my head, it's probably a good time to downshift a little bit too. In Berlin, I was always going to the theater and the opera and involved in this, that, and the other thing, super involved in my church, super involved. I was just burning the candle at both ends all the time there. I never had an empty calendar. I always had it full with everything. And I was always looking for more stuff to pack into it. I was like,
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's I know my calendar.
Yeah. And I thought, man, I mean, okay, in 2006, I was 41. So I was like, maybe it's time to slow down a little bit. And I did welcome it. I made jokes about coming here and that I was living here in exile, but eventually, I mean, you can't compare the two cities. One is what it is, the other one is what it is. And there's good things to Berlin as well as bad things, but you're going to have anywhere you go.
And then what also happened in 2006 was the closure of Tempelhof Airport. Do you remember that day?
Oh, that was 2008. That was 2 years.
Oh, 2008, so right? Okay. So
yeah.
2006, you came to Berlin, and then you were to Bremen, and then you were still working Tempelhof from Bremen, and then 2008 that was closing. Were you on duty on that day when Tempelhof was closing?
No, I went to Berlin because it closed on October 31st, 2008.
Okay.
And I went to Berlin about a month earlier because over Xing, this XING, that network, when I came to Bremen, I put a profile at Xing, and then I made like a bowling team to meet new people. So I met tons of people at Xing. Yeah, and I was also at Xing and was in the aviation forum. And there were a bunch of people that were really saddened about Tempelhof closing. And I always would put my 2 cents in there about how I was saddened. And there was a gentleman in Frankfurt that wanted to do a fly-in. And he asked me if I could help him do it. And I was like, sure, I'll see what I can do. And we organized a fly-in. I think that must have been in September of 2008. And it was beautiful. We organized buses. We had a big dinner together. We took everyone to this big dinner on the Kudamm. We had like a big special meeting on the apron at Tempelhof. There were aircraft from the UK. I think there was 250, 300 flights.
Wow.
They didn't come in like all at once. They came in like a little bit at a time because we had talked to the special airspace use guy. And he was like, well, they have to try to come in VFR, not to bother the controllers and stuff like that. but it was cool. It was cool and it was sad. There were so many people that wanted to have one last flight and one last look. And for me, that was like my Abschied to Tempelhof because it gave me everything. And oh, I don't want to get sad here. But the day it closed, some also overseeing in the aviation forum, some guy that owns a helicopter, like a weird little in Werder. Werder is west of Berlin by Potsdam. Werder an der Havel. It's different than the Werder here. And he offered to give me a helicopter flight to Tempelhof. I was like, VIP treatment, of course, I'm going to do this. And the weather was really bad that day. So I drove to Werder from Bremen. I get there and his helicopter, it looks like a home built thing. It was like the rotor was, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to put my hair away somewhere because that thing is just gonna, and like the floor was plexiglass. But he was a cool dude. And it was like the first time I met him and I was like, let's do this. And I think we waited an hour or something because the weather just wasn't getting better. And I was like, look, I called Bruce at Tempelhof Tower and I was like, Bruce, we're going to need some special VFR, man, or something. And I told the guy, don't worry, I got this under control. It's going to be cool. Just miss the trees and power lines or whatever. And we took off and I don't know what, I'm going to say we flew extremely low and in IMC conditions the majority of the time. We were assured that there was nobody else out there, nobody or none around us. But that was the scariest flight of my life. And I was like, if I die flying to Tempelhof today. But so we landed next to everyone else. And the guy didn't stay that long. He was like, I'm going to be stuck here if I don't get out of here now. And I was like, right. Because then someone's going to have to transport your aircraft. And he took off. And then I just wandered around the perimeter, like watching all the people's faces. The saddest was in front of the Flughafen Eingang, you know, the main entrance to the terminal. All the Berliners were there. It was so gray and so rainy and so all these Berliners were there lighting candles and stuff. And in the Flughafen terminal, there was all these politicians and VIPs and stuff. They were like celebrating this. It was like you were at a funeral outside, all of this gray, dark and despair. And then in there, it was like holly golly party. And I was it sucked so bad for the people outside to see this lack of like reverence for that special place, that they couldn't have, you know, contained themselves, that they had to be in there sipping champagne as if they were celebrating something good. Because for everyone else, it didn't feel good.
But it's interesting that all those Berliners came for the closure because it was in the middle of the city, right? And a lot of people were affected by airplane noise, but still Berlin seemed to really love this airport. And it was the same when I was attending the Tegel closure back in October 2020. There were so many people just saying goodbye to their airport because it actually was the last of Berlin's airports. The BER is not inside the Berlin city. So that was another very sad day. Have you been working the last Tegel day?
Yeah, I worked the last Air France.
Oh right, we worked that was together, right? Yeah. I remember. Now I was on the 7th of November. It was, I think, I was in Berlin. There was like the last operational day with lots of VFR traffic coming in for a low pass, and then still those normal flights to Frankfurt, Düsseldorf, and wherever.
Right.
And then on the 8th of November, there was only one flight leaving Tegel that day. That was the Air France, which also was the first one landing in Tegel when it was a civil airport back then. Right. So how did you
That's-
feel about that, losing another airport within your career?
I mean, you say it is what it is. I didn't think it felt good. I mean, when the decision was made, it was made. It seemed, I mean, what I wanted to do at the very end is at least to control the new airport a little bit before I left. So saying goodbye to Tegel is a natural part of this process that they're doing in Berlin. I would say politically, I think that made absolutely no sense. Tempelhof, that closure probably did make sense. I mean, it was built at a time, it's not meant for the kind of traffic, the taxiing areas. It makes no sense for modern aviation. It's beautiful. It's historic. Now it serves also a beautiful purpose, but it was not built for modern aviation. And Tegel, they could have. They never really gave Tegel a chance. They didn't invest in Tegel for 20 years because for 20 years it was always closing, They let it.
They could have kept one of the airports as a business airport or just for the government airplanes, right? I mean,
God,
with all those business airplanes, like the slow citations and everything else,
right?
They don't really fit into the traffic flow on final at BER. So you would always have to delay an Airbus a little bit to get the small business jets in and everything. So that would have been great. And it's in the middle of the city, which is perfect for businessmen who just come there in the morning and then leave in the afternoon.
Right.
But
Hagen is not going to fill that void. And I don't think Strasbourg is going to fill that void.
No.
Or does Strasbourg, do they have a RMC? Or they have plans for one, right?
Not yet, but I think Strausberg is receiving their instrument procedures in June this year.
Oh, wow.
And I think there are also a couple other airfields like Küritz and Neuhardenberg and Fino. They all want to have their RMP approach, but they won't replace an airport in the middle of the city because it's still like a 30-minute or so ride into the city. So,
right.
Yeah.
No, Berlin had it good for a long time. I mean, they really had a long stretch, but in a way, it makes, the thing is, because like Immobilien is so expensive, and the more people move in, umland, it actually makes more sense to have other airports a little bit further away from the center of the city, because that's where people are going to be going anyway. Yeah. It's going to happen in lots of big cities. It's just, Berlin is probably going to be less desirable in 10 or 15 years because of everything that made it great. It won't exist anymore. I think already this pandemic is going to take a big bite out of their Tanzkultur, this techno dancing thing.
Yeah,
that was, every EasyJet flight, you would stand at Tegel and see the people getting off an EasyJet or something. And they all had, like hair out to, and they would be like, already getting off the plane. They were like, we're going to Berlin. So it was like, I loved it. I thought it was great. I love that beautiful kind of freedom that people would have. It's like getting off the plane in Las Vegas. You get off the plane in Las Vegas and it's like, whoo, whoo, whoo.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Exactly.
Talking about goodbyes, we've had Tempelhof and Tegel, and then there was this goodbye from Air Berlin, which was our airline. I remember the good old days when I finished my training back then, and we had those inbound rushes, like 4 or 5 inbound rushes. Everything was full. The frequency was full. The holdings were full. The transitions full. Air Berlin, everything came in since Tegel was the hub for Air Berlin. And then they left all at the same time. And then in 2017, we lost like our airline. That felt so bad. I remember us working it. There's an ATC recording on YouTube, which we can listen real quick. And then we designed those shirts, which was pretty cool back then. So
let's say that, and we all had them on.
We all had them on. I'll just show some pictures from the day and put them into the video. How do you remember that day?
Oh, that also felt similar to Tempelhof closing, believe it or not. I felt devastated that could happen. that felt, God, that day felt really, really hard. I wasn't sure if I really wanted to sit in position. I wasn't sure if I would keep it together. So that just
you actually prepared a little goodbye saying to Captain Dave, who you also know. Let's listen to it real quick.
Yeah.
Ja, Berlin Forever. Sie müssen mal sehen, was hier gerade hinter mir los ist. Hier sind viele, viele Kollegen aus dem Berlin Approach, die heute eigentlich gar nicht arbeiten würden, extra nochmal reingekommen, um sich heute von Ihnen zu verabschieden. Ich möchte mich persönlich bei Ihnen, der Crew und der gesamten Air Berlin für die super Zusammenarbeit bedanken und wünsche Ihnen alles Gute, hoffe, dass wir uns bald wiedersehen unter einem anderen Callsign auf unserer Frequenz. Es geht jetzt weiter bei Colleen auf der 136.1. Tschüss und alles Gute.
136.1 und ihr sprechen mich aus dem Herzen. Vielen Dank. Ihr seid alle toll für uns und wir hoffen, dass wir sehen uns ja bald wieder. Man sieht sich immer zweimal im Leben. Danke. Air Berlin Forever. Over and out. Have a better one. ATC, Air Berlin Forever.
Hey buddy, Air Berlin Forever, you identified fly heading 070.
Right turn 070, Air Berlin Forever.
Okay, to get this out of the way, Captain Dave, and all of the people of Air Berlin, you served an island city and you grew to serve a nation. You transported people to adventures, to their loved ones, to work and home. And Air Berlin's been a great ambassador to the city of Berlin, and she'll always live in our hearts and in our minds and in our memories forever.
It was a wonderful thing to serve.
Air Berlin Forever, heading 230, you're equipped with the ILS 26 right, call me established.
Right turn 230, equipped with the ILS, runway 26 right, we'll call you established. Air Berlin Forever. What a wonderful tour of Berlin. Thank you, Bremen Center.
We love you, Dave, and hope to hear you soon in different colors or whatever, but I'll always know you by your have a better one.
No.
Air Berlin Forever, contact Eagle Tower 124525. I'll be your thing.
124525 for Air Berlin Forever. Have a better one.
Okay. Yeah, but you and Dave had a really nice little, you know, where they said you did your heart over Berlin by vectoring him.
That was actually not on purpose. Like it was everyone in the media. So I was working approach and then saying hello to him. And then I think I asked him, is there anything special you would like to do? And he said, yeah, if we could see all the three airports over Berlin and then come in for landing. And then I kind of vectored him. And then there was this go around or something with a Nicky or so. You had him on frequency, had some kind of a flap problem or whatever. And so I had to change my plans and then vector him around for a little bit more than initially planned. And that, I don't know, it somehow it looked like a heart on the flight radar thing, but that was not on purpose. And then you had him on feeder and you said the last goodbye, you sent the last ever Air Berlin to Tegel Tower.
Yeah.
So I guess that was the super sad feeling back then.
That was sad. And I was happy to get out of position that night because then everyone was kind of jubilant. I don't know if you remember, everyone came and we took that picture together. I was really like in a bubble. I really felt like, it's like, I don't know. I felt very alone in this sadness. I think there were like, I felt like you felt it, like to the same intensity. I know Felix came over and said something to me and he really was like, but I could like I could sense for who this sentimentality or something was like a huge weight. It really felt like, hard to breathe. And that's weird to have a relationship to an arc to like
it's not only the airline
entity.
But it's not only the airline. We both know Air Berlin pilots who lost their job that night We know the history of the airline. It's not an airline which was flying for like 2 years or so. It was like it was German history. So
and it felt so cool that Berlin had its own. You don't have like Air New York or Air Paris or Air London. Okay, maybe you have something similar, but Air Berlin was like the ambassador for a nation.
Yeah.
And it started out with Germany's fixation with going to Mallorca, and it turned into this. But that's pretty much how it started. It was just the daily Mallorca flug, and it turned into this great, big, wonderful family of aviators. But like you said, those Air Berlin rushes, they could be annoying as heck, man. Sometimes you would sit there and be like, "Oh,
I loved it. I loved it.
I did too.
After Air Berlin was gone, it was probably more or less the same amount of traffic, like with EasyJet and Ryanair and Lufthansa taking part of their flights. But it was not this hub airport anymore. So you had a constant flow of air traffic for the whole day. But you didn't even have to use the transitional holdings anymore, which was, I don't know, it was kind of boring. And there were only a couple of times a day where you could still sit on feeder position and then like always do those 3.2, 3.3 miles.
2.8.
2.8. No, we never did 2.8, never.
No, never.
Never. Hey, Tower, do you see them? Are you visual on them? Can you do a swing over?
Yeah.
No,
those days are long gone. Yeah.
True, yeah.
It's gonna be a while before you guys see those days again.
I know. I'm so happy that I ever saw them. So or the new controllers which aren't training now, I feel so sorry for them because they only sit there and they have like 2 aircraft, maybe 3 aircraft at a time on frequency with the COVID right now. So that's bad. Yeah. I
think when it comes back, it's going to come back. It maybe not the same as 2018 or 17 or something like that, but it'll come back. I think I'm fed up with sitting at home. I think everybody wants to get in an airplane and go someplace.
Yeah.
That's like my flights for June, I've canceled, which I can't believe. But
so what are your plans now for retirement? Do you have any special plans?
Yeah, I'm going to Dusseldorf, and there I want to just focus on writing this book. I thought hard about the choice of place, and I thought in Berlin I have way too many distractions there, that there's no way I would focus on this one thing that I want to finish. And I wanted to get distance to Bremen, and I wanted to be closer to other places that I would like to visit and stuff like that. So this is probably just the first step in going someplace else, if it's Portugal 5 years down the road. But right now, this is only a move for the purpose of finishing the book and concentrating on that.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed that you will have time enough to finish those books. I'm really excited to read those.
Oh, I think I will. And if we stay in lockdown for 2 more years, man, that puppy's going to be done by the end of this year.
Nice. So I think we have a good 1.5 hours now. I prepared one more thing for the podcast. There's this Pilot to Pilot podcast I listen to. And that guy, he has this rapid fire question section in the end. So I prepared like 5 or 6 questions, and I'll ask them to you, and you can just answer them whatever first comes to your mind, and then try to think on it as an air traffic controller, not as a passenger also. All right. So which position did you prefer working? Was it radar or co?
Feeder.
Okay, that's actually the next question. Did you prefer tower, approach, or feeder?
Feeder.
What was your favorite airline?
Pan Am.
What was your least favorite airline?
Austrian. That's an easy one.
and I remember why.
Exactly.
What was your favorite airport?
Tempelhof.
Do you prefer radar vectoring or using waypoints and RNAV transitions?
Victor.
And that was a good one too. Do you prefer working like on a sunny day with Cav okay, or work in thunderstorms and busy airspace?
Thunderstorms, definitely thunderstorms.
And what's your favorite aircraft type?
Oh, there's that. I like a shorts. Shorts. It has that double tail in the back.
Yep.
What is it? What is the number? Shorts 36, is that right? Or 22?
360. 360, yeah.
360. Shorts 360.
Okay.
For some reason, I like that airplane.
Okay.
It didn't fly in our airspace, but I like it.
It's not a usual answer, but I'll take it.
And I like the Pilatus also, the Pilatus 6.
Oh, the Porter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
I think that is I think that guy, the ceiling on that little mother sucker is amazing for
the size of
I like
airplane,
that.
yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right, Colleen, that's it from my side. Thank you very, very much for that interesting podcast. I've been looking forward to this for months, and I wish you all the best for your retirement. And I just hope we keep in touch. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you. Over and out.
Over and out. Roger.
Roger. Airman Conrad reports his order.